What's up, guys? So October 1st ban list has been released, so that's when it's going to become live. And then on top of that, we also have the Megatins coming out on the 1st of October. So we're going to have a bit of a shake up to the format, I think. It won't be huge, but definitely we're going to be seeing a little bit different to what we've been seeing for the past few months. In addition to that, we've also got some new decks coming out in Flunderies and Sword Soul, so it's going to be really interesting. So let's get it straight into that tier list and start off with Altergeist. Now, I've been to one or two tournaments, bigger tournaments, while this format has been going on, and Altergeist I definitely think is firmly in the rogue tier, potentially even tier 2. And it's simply a case of, this is a diverse format. It's a really diverse format with quite a few decks, and this is where decks like Altergeist really shine, because they have a good matchup against a lot of different rogue decks, a lot of different tier 2 decks. So they might not necessarily be able to consistently win against your tier 1 decks, but those decks aren't going to be the only decks you're seeing. So I definitely think Altergeist does have a good place. In addition, I mean, they can main deck Imperial Order, Anti-Spell, Secret Village, and they don't care about that card if it's used against them, so that's a big advantage. Their big weakness probably is just going to be things like Dragoon, but I do still think definitely they're going to be firmly rogue. Then moving on from that, I'm going to actually put Sky Striker in tier 2. I think Sky Striker is going to get just a little bit better, and it's similar reasons to Altergeist. It just has a good place in the format right now. However, I think before, the disadvantage of Sky Striker was really that it just couldn't keep up with the grind of both Prank Kids and Tri Brigades. That was its real weakness. And then also Drytron. Things like Dragoon and Drytron is also frustrating. Things like Imperial Order is frustrating. However, with those decks seeing slight hits, I do think Sky Striker does become a lot stronger. I'm not going to say it's amazing. It's not the best tier 2 deck, but I'd say it's at the bottom edge of tier 2, and it's going to be better than pretty much every rogue deck. So I definitely do think Sky Striker has a great place in the format at the moment. Then moving on, we've got Salad. Salad is almost the same as Sky Striker. I think Salad is an incredible deck, to be honest. I think it's not played enough, surprisingly, but it really just does a good job of making that same board over and over again. Now, definitely Tri Brigade is the better version of Salad at the moment. Tri Brigade is way better at doing its job, and you're going to hear me say Tri Brigade and Prank Kids so many times in this video. But in spite of that, I still do think that Salamangreat is definitely solid tier 2 deck. It's not going to be dominating, but it's definitely going to be one of the best decks at any event, at least until Sword Soul and Flunderies come out for sure. And speaking of those two decks, Flunderies. So Flunderies I'm actually going to put in the rogue category. Flunderies has a really good gameplay loop. The ability to essentially normal summon like 50 times a turn is funny. It's like, they call it normal summon, but it's basically a special summon anyway. But the ability to do that over and over and over and over again, and then just put out these oppressive floodgates really easily. I mean, they're using Monarch cards for removal. Sometimes they can put out the barriers. They can main deck things like Dimensional Shifter and Macrocosmos, and they all of their cards recycle pretty much. They'll banish themselves when they tribute, and then they just recycle it back to the hand. I mean, it's got an amazing resource game. However, the weakness of Flunderies is definitely going to be the fact that they are quite susceptible to their normal summon being interrupted. I mean, at the moment we have a few decks that are like that, but Flunderies especially, if you stop their first normal, a lot of times they are going to be completely screwed. So yeah, I definitely am going to put them in that rogue tier. I think they will shoot up and they will be relevant, but I don't think they're going to be as strong necessarily as the top decks in the format. Then moving on, Drytron. So Drytron, yeah, it's still going to be tier 1. The Eve hit is practically irrelevant. Pretty much everyone's only playing one Eva anyway. You can play 2, but you don't really need more. It's not doing a huge amount. So yeah, Drytron, nothing's really changed. I'd definitely say it's still tier 1. I would say it's weaker than Tri Brigade and Prank Kids, especially in longer form tournaments, just because it's easier to side for and it's easier to completely blow out like that. But it's still a tier 1 deck. It's still definitely one of the best decks of the format. Virtual. So I've actually been playing Virtual for the last month, and I think Virtual's amazing. I would say Virtual, it isn't necessarily as strong as the top 3 decks, but it is definitely top 5. It's at the top of tier 2 for sure. Just the ability to have again, it's got a really good matchup. It's a lot of decks, and that's one of the interesting things about this format. We have a lot of these mid-range control-y decks that just have good matchups against loads of decks, and so everything becomes more of a skill matchup, more of a tech matchup, like do you have the right tech cards to counter and stuff. But yeah, that's one really good thing about Virtual. I definitely think that they're doing well at the moment. Now the second emergency teleport is going to be really interesting to see what that does, because it's weird. You would think that just one extra emergency teleport is only a small difference, but it actually opens up a lot of combos for Virtual that weren't really viable before. Even things like Malicious and 2/2 become a lot more viable to play inside Virtual World just because you have access to another starter that you wouldn't normally have access to. So it's going to be interesting to see what it does. I don't think it's going to suddenly jump out. Virtual World isn't really a deck that dominates any matchup other than maybe like the Shadow Invoked matchup. But in spite of that, I do really think that it's gonna be in a good position. It's still gonna be one of the top 5 decks. And also when Sword Soul comes out, whew, Virtual World becomes really, really insane. I'm just letting you know, guys, now that level 6 in Sword Soul is going to be a mandatory 3 of if you're playing Virtual World, because it's just so good. It basically makes you immune to Nibiru. None of this Brave Token nonsense. You don't need to do that. Put 3 of that level 3 in your Virtual World deck, and you're going to be doing amazingly. Then we're going to move on to Ignister. So look, I don't have much respect for Ignister, I can't lie, and I'm going to put at the bottom of Rogue tier. Ignister, it's an interesting deck, but I think it really just suffers from the problem of not being able to go first in a relevant way. Sure, you can put up an arrival, and some decks will struggle to ally it occasionally, but by and large, it's just not enough. It can go second really, really well, and it can play through a lot going second. But the way I describe Ignister, in my opinion, is always just shitty Crusadia. I think if I want to play a deck and I'm going to be forced to go second, I'd rather just play something like Crusadia and guarantee I kill my opponent than playing Ignister, to be honest. But it is still a good deck. I just don't think it's really worth putting in tier 2 alongside the others. I think it's going to struggle to really deal with those top decks just because it can't go first. If they get a few changes though, we might see something different. One thing is nice though, is that this is one of the decks that is seeing a lot of reprints, and especially cards like AI Land, which were quite expensive before. That is going to allow a lot of budget players to start playing this card, start playing these cards, and so we might see a lot more Ignister in the format, not necessarily because it's better, but just because it's been reprinted. Then next, so I've got Invoked here, and this is just Invoked Variants as a whole, and I would say Invoked Variants as a whole are definitely going to be at the bottom of tier 2, but still very good. What's really great, and in fact, I'm actually going to put them above Striker, just above Striker, and what's really good is that I think Nadir Servant was probably a card we did think was going to get hit, but luckily, Nadir Servant not being hit definitely allows Stoll, Invoked, Lich, all these variants to just stay relevant in the format, because they've still got access to that power play and sort of putting out a free window if they need to. And just in general, the Nadir Servant engine in general is just a good engine to have in your deck, even if you're not using it for window. Just the ability to put an Atis on board or to get that Ecclesia Negate is going to be really nice. So I definitely think Invoked Variants are still going to be in tier 2, really good deck. Not necessarily as strong as the other top decks in the format. One of the biggest weaknesses of them at the moment is essentially it's really easy for both Prank Kids and Tri Brigades to play around your normal summon and make it impossible for you to actually do anything in the game. But beyond that, they still are good decks. Again, another deck that has a good matchup against everything in the format, and so definitely we're going to be seeing a lot of those. Madolches, I have a huge amount of love for Madolches in my heart. I am putting it at the top of the Rogue tier, but it's with a stipulation. One of the things about Madolches is I'd say it's very, very skill based. It's based on the player. A good player will consistently top with Madolches, and I mean, we see Madolches top all the time. It's so weird. You always get that one random Madolche playing top 16 or whatever, and it's because it's just such a good deck. The ability to essentially clear virtually any board, it's just nutty. However, obviously, Madolche suffers from similar weaknesses to other control decks. Weaknesses in the norm summon, they pretty much get stopped by virtually any hand trap, which makes it a bit hard for them. Their going first play isn't amazing. It's not terrible, but it's not amazing as well. But I do think they're stronger than most of the other decks in the Rogue tier, and so we're definitely going to be seeing quite a bit of Madolche. I think one of the nice things as well is Zeus. Just the existence of Zeus allows Madolches to deal with some threats that they weren't able to deal with before, and so that getting reprinted is going to be nice, because now you're going to see more people being able to actually put 3 Zeuses in their extra deck, just so that they can occasionally kind of wipe the boards if they have if they're playing into like 5 back row or whatever. Instead of having to mess around with Souffle and stuff, they can just completely nuke the board, which is really, really nice. But yeah, Madolche is definitely top of Rogue tier. I think it's a good deck. Dragon Link. So Dragon Link's an interesting one, and it's hard to really decide whether to put it at the top of Rogue or bottom of tier 2. I think for now I'm actually going to leave Dragon Link at the bottom of tier 2. Dragon Link is a great deck, and they do have a good gameplay loop, but I would say that, again, this is another really skill-based deck. It really depends on the player, and I think that's why we're not seeing it. It's the kind of deck that needs to be solved, but once it's solved, it tends to do a lot, because there's just so much Dragon support. There's so much you can do with it. One of the things that we're seeing a lot now is people playing things like Fallen of Albaz, and if I'm not mistaken, that's getting a reprint, which is going to be awesome. In fact, just because it's getting a reprint, which I just remembered now, I'm going to move it up a little bit, because having access to that card is going to be awesome. But yeah, Dragon Link really really does do a lot, but it's just a hard deck to play and it's a hard deck to build, which is why I don't think we see it as much as we could. But definitely it's going to be interesting. I mean, that Seals combo into Albaz is just pretty nutty. It's going to be really interesting to see how it deals with the upcoming format. One of the things as well you tend to find in formats like these is I feel like you usually only have room for about one combo deck at the top, and then everything else, if it's not as good as being combo, then it tends to just be significantly worse and we don't see it. So most of the best players are going to be playing Tron if they want to play combo. They're not going to bother playing these other decks, because what's the point of playing in inferior Dragon Link when you can just play Tron and put up 16 negates instead? But it's still a good deck. This is not me saying Dragon Link is not a good deck, by the way. Dragon Link is definitely an awesome deck, but I do think it's a combo. It is essentially a combo deck, and it is inferior to the best combo deck of the format at the moment, which is why I think I'm going to leave it in tier 2. Moving on to Dinos. At the moment, I think Dinos is non-meta. Yeah, biggest problem with Dinos at the moment is going down to 1 misc just really hurts them at the moment. I don't even think they're rogue tier. Only having 1 misc really just limits a lot of the things they can do. Now, cross-up designate is going to be awesome, and it gives a general buff to all combo decks for the most part, because they basically have Call by the Grave back. But in spite of that, I still don't think it's enough to really secure for Dinos, because misc function is both a defensive and offensive play for Dinos, and now only having 4 copies essentially of misc in the deck, because they have the OBs. I guess it's 7, I don't know. I'm trying to do maths in my head, whatever. But basically, having less copies of misc definitely does slow them down. If that OB gets hit, they are pretty screwed, same as before. So yeah, I think Dinos, it's just not really worth playing at all, to be honest. It's a good deck. It's better than it's going to be better than most of the other non-meta decks, but I definitely won't play. Another big weakness as well is Lancia is going to be running around this format a lot because of Tri Brigade. You don't want to be playing Dinos, because people are going to be countering you with things like Lancia and Droll because of Tri Brigade and Shadow, and then it counters you too, and you're not even better than those decks, which is really a shame. Then we have Earth Machine. Earth Machine is another one I'm actually going to put in non-meta. I think it's going to fall off more. Earth Machine, we were seeing more and more of Earth Machine. It's a really interesting deck, but it really just comes down to the same problem. It just dies to every single hand trap, and so as a result, it just becomes, why would you play this deck that's dying to every hand trap? Just play another deck if you want to play a control deck. And it's also not really doing anything turn 1. It gains and accrues advantage really well. What they tend to do is just end on like a double anger knocker, which isn't a huge amount, but ending on that double anger knocker with 5 back row and 4 cards in hand, and then doing it again next turn is pretty insane. Having said that, it's pretty easy to stop that. People are going to be playing cards like Ghost Spell and such, and it's just not enough at the moment. The top decks, Prank Kids and Tri Brigade, at the moment have an insane resource game anyway. So again, if you want to play the resource game, play one of those decks. It's not worth playing Earth Machine, in my opinion, and so as a result, I definitely don't think we're going to be seeing much of that at all. Moving on, we've got Mech Knight. So Mech Knight, this is probably Mech Knight Invoked is the only one, but I guess Mech Knights in general, and again, non-meta. At the moment, going second decks aren't the best. It's too risky to go second into a lot of these decks, because clearing a board is all of the top decks essentially are hard to kill. It's really hard to consistently kill your Drytron. It's really hard to consistently kill Tri Brigade. It's really hard to consistently kill Prank Kids. And so as a result, if you don't kill them, they just make the same board next turn and you lose anyway, especially Drytron. Drytron, if you don't kill them or completely eviscerate their graveyard, you're not going to be winning. Mech Knight has always struggled to OTK without things like Dragoon, and I don't think it's going to be any different this format. And so yeah, Mech Knight, unfortunately, I think it's probably better than Earth Machine, worse than Dinos in terms of OTKing, because Dinos just has a better type removal options in terms of Tyranno. But yeah, I'd say even though it's one of my favorite decks, I really do love Mech Knight Invoked. You guys definitely know that. But yeah, definitely going to be non-meta. Then we're going to be looking at Subterrors. So Subterrors, I'm going to say Dragoon Subterror, luckily enough, managed to escape the ban list, and it's basically just a different version of Geist, in my opinion. It's the same thing. They abuse Dragoon more, I guess, but their disadvantage is that their resource game isn't necessarily as strong as Geist. But yeah, Subterror, same thing as last format. It's an interesting deck. One of the reasons why we're not seeing a lot of back row decks at the moment is also because of Lightning Storm, Harpy Server Dust, all of these cards running around. There's just so much back row removal at the moment that it's hard to consistently play these back row decks. Having said that, it's still a good deck, still a good option. I say If you want to play a back row deck and you want to play an easy deck, Subterrace is definitely a good one. It's got a very low barrier to entry. Obviously, every deck has skill expression, but I'd say this is one of the easier decks to play, and it's definitely one to consider. So I've got a picture of Burning Abyss, but this is actually PK/Burning Abyss. All of those variants I'm putting together. I'm not actually counting Control Burning Abyss. So this is like PK Fire. I don't know why I only put a Burning Abyss picture, but I'm actually going to put these guys quite high. I'm going to put them high in tier 2. And so they were already good lost format. They've just got extenders for days. And then I think the release of Crossout Designator is going to be amazing for them. One of the biggest weaknesses of that deck, obviously, is they can get hand trapped and stunned. Having said that, they're similar to Tron, where they can just make Dragoon, basically. That can be their play. They can make either Dragoon or Utopic Future super easily if they get hand trapped. And so it's definitely going to be really interesting to see what this deck does with Crossout Designator, because it really just does mitigate a lot of their problems. So I definitely think it's potentially even a top 5 deck, and we are going to be seeing a lot of PK. I think deck does well. Also, it's getting a lot of Torn Scales reprints in the Megatins, so we're going to be seeing more of it as a result of that as well. But yeah, definitely a great deck. Lovely to have. Cyber Dragon's another one, non-merit at the moment. In fact, I'm going to put it one lower in the not the best category. This is, I mean, in this non-meta category, you can play these decks and potentially succeed. Cyber Dragons, I think, at the moment, just don't even go near the deck at the moment. It's just not worth it. Like I said, going second right now, it's just not worth it. It's so hard to consistently go second. And all Cyber Dragons can really do at the moment is put up Infinity plus Dragoon. That's like their board. There's 1,000,001 decks that can do that. If you want to do that, go play flipping Subterrace, dude. You'll put up Dragoon as well, but at least you can still play the game potentially. I just think Cyber Dragons are not in a great position. They don't like Imperial Order. They don't like the hand traps. They're not consistently killing any of the top decks. Yeah, Cyber Dragons at the moment, it's just trash. It seems like I'm hating on Cyber Dragons, but yeah, whatever. So Inferno Ball is going to be rogue tier. Inferno Ball's a really interesting deck, and Crossout Designator going to help again. Is going to help it a lot. Like I said, all of these combo decks are going to see a slight buff because of Crossout Designator. I mean, every deck does see a slight buff, but the combo decks especially, because a lot of these combo decks, especially like Inferno Ball's is probably the best example. Especially if they open something like Neo Space Connector, they only really have one choke point at that beginning. If they get past their initial start, especially if they either get past the Neo Space Connector or they they have an extender in their hand and they get Isolde to summon Dolphin from deck, then you can't hand trap them, and they're just going to make an insane board. And Crossout Designator, 3 more copies of Designator is going to be insane for them. So I really do think they have a good place in the meta. However, like I said, they're not as good as Tron, unfortunately, and so that's why we're not going to see as much. But I do think it's a great deck. I do think top of the road tier, not necessarily tier 2 yet, unfortunately. It's a very varied and control based meta, which makes decks like this super easy to side for, and that's what the weaknesses come to. The cards the cards that Inferno Ball lose to is also the cards that Tron lose to. It's also the cards that PK Fire lose to, and then so the real decision becomes, is their recursion as good as the other 2 decks? No, PK recurs way better than Inferno Ball, so does Tron. So as a result, it just becomes not as good, unfortunately. But still an interesting deck. I think we might see some people top of it, but definitely not more than 1 or 2 in my opinion. Tri-Brigade, I think Tri-Brigade is still pretty much the best deck of the format. Yeah, it's just a good deck. The hits literally didn't do anything too much. I mean, Barrage hit is interesting because obviously one of the things about Tri-Brigades is that essentially you either want to have your normal summon, then you want to have something to get your Keras out of your hand, and then the Zodiac Barrage added another way to potentially summon. But it really doesn't change much for the deck because it's so consistent in the first place. I think losing Tenki as well, again, you've lost 2 copies of Fractal, but the deck's problem really wasn't ever consistency getting to its opening hand. That the games that Tri-Brigades tends to lose are the games where it doesn't resolve Revolt. That tends to be what you're going to lose. And so I think hitting both of those things don't really do much to stop Tri-Brigade that much. They're going to see their Revolt. They're going to, unless you consistently are having 1 to 2 hand traps in your opening hand, you're not going to stop the Tri-Brigade player doing their regular plays. And so I do still think it's the best deck of the format. I do think when Sword Soul comes out, they're going to be less good. They might go down a little bit because Sword Soul's a deck which really doesn't care. In fact, you don't want to banish the Sword Soul cards. But beyond that, yeah, Tri-Brigade, still the best deck of the format. Still just insane and hard to deal with. Pendulums, look, guys, don't believe the hype. Don't believe the hype. Konami's taking the piss of us. In fact, I'm putting them in not the best as well. They're worse than Cyber Dragons. Look, until we get Electromite or something that similar, it's just not a good deck. The control version with the pendulum graphs is trash. It's not doing anything that any other deck can't do. So yeah, I just think pendulums is horrible at the moment. Imperial Order being played is also frustrating for pendulums. They just don't have a win condition. They don't have good starters. And especially in a format like this at the moment, one of the biggest weaknesses of pendulums is the fact that you essentially have to commit 2 cards from your hand already for your skills just to play the game. Now, sometimes this is mitigated by being able to have cards that put to another skill automatically. So you have things like pen call and stuff. But in general, it just means that hand traps aren't as good in pendulums as they are in other decks. It's hard to play hand traps in pendulums, and so it ends up being a much worse deck because you can't have no hand traps when you have some of these decks in the format, especially in a varied and diverse format like this. You need to have those generic hand traps in your main decks. You need those ashes, those imperms. Pendulums half the time can't play that because they struggle. They need every card in their hand to combo. So yeah, definitely the worst combo deck, and especially the Pendulum Magician variant. I'll talk about Endymion in a second, but Pendulum Magicians, not worth. The two things they got back literally do nothing. It's a big buff, but I mean, it went from being like 1 out of 10 to being like 3 out of 10. So yeah, it's a lot better, but it's still really bad. Sword Soul. So preliminary Sword Soul, I do think it's going to be somewhere in tier 2 to start off with. I think it will get up into tier 1 eventually, but it'll take a while for people to solve how to play this deck. The thing about Sword Soul is it's just really consistent. Sword Soul, I don't know if Baroness comes out at the same time as the other cards. If it does, it's going to be awesome. But yeah, the thing about Sword Soul, it's just a super consistent deck. It's pretty much always going to put out those 2 negates, and that's what makes it great. It doesn't really matter what those hands are. When I say 2 negates, those 2 interactions every turn, and then it can OTK you quite effectively after. I've seen so many Sword Soul builds, and so that's why I think to start off with, we might see it at the top of tier 2, just as that consistent control-y deck. And then as it gets solved and as it gets better, we might then start to see Sword Soul hit the kind of tier 1 levels when people really know how to optimize it and make it the best deck of the format. But yeah, definitely a tier 2. Sword Soul is going to be a really good one to watch out for. Moving on, we've got Shadow's. So Shadow's a really good deck, and I'm going to put it similarly bottom of tier 2. And so, like I said, Nadir Servant not getting hit is just really, really awesome. It just allows the deck to stay in the format quite easily. On top of that, Winder's always going to be a great card. Winder, there was a couple of people talking about Winder potentially being hit, and it's a similar thing. If Winder doesn't get hit, then there's really no reason why Shadows would be any weaker, because just the ability to put out that card and put out that really generic floodgate that just pretty much hits everything is going to be awesome. They do have their inherent weaknesses. One of the biggest weaknesses for them at the moment actually is they have no grind because their extra deck is so tight. So Invoked, Shadow, Dogmatic, I mean, they can go through like 2 constructs if they're lucky. 2 constructs, 2 Winders, 1 Apollonia, and then it's like it's over for them. So that is sucking for them at the moment. But beyond that, yeah, definitely a good deck, definitely easily tier 2. But yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what happens next format, if they're going to come out a little bit, because we are going to have a lot more banish. We're going to have a slower format. So we're going to have more banish and control base decks like Flonderies and Sword Soul coming in. So it's going to be interesting to see if Shadow can keep up with those decks. So Endymion. So I think Endymion Pendulum is better than regular Pendulum, like it pretty much always has been, but it's still trash. It's still not worth playing. Again, it's the whole inferior combo deck thing. Now, the difference between Endymion Pendulum and Magician Pendulum is essentially the Endymion cards themselves tend to be pretty good. Servant, all of them are good without having to go into the extra deck, whereas the Pendulum Magicians are literally bricks until you go into the extra deck and do something with them. But in spite of that, I still don't think it's good. Same issues as before. You're just not really able to play the game because you can't play hand traps, and so as a result, non-meta, I don't really think it's worth playing it. Pardon me. And moving on, Grand Margie. Grand Margie, I think, is actually really good at the moment. I think we're not seeing a lot of Grand Margie, surprisingly enough, and it's probably because of Imperm. Imperm does cuck that deck a lot. But beyond the prevalence of cards like Imperm and Vela in the meta at the moment, Grand Margie is great in diverse formats like these. Grand Margie is good in either extreme. If you've got a really, really diverse format like we have now, Grand Margie is great because it's got a very simple and effective strategy, which means it's going to just win against a lot of decks by virtue of having a simpler strategy and a very fast and effective game plan. It also works in solved formats where there's only 1 or 2 decks. It works in those formats as well because then you can just focus on countering them as a go second deck. And then also Dimension Shifter is good. Dimension Shifter is good. This is going to be a good deck. So yeah, Grand Margie is definitely okay. I'll definitely say it's in the rogue tier at the moment, But out of all of the Go Second decks, I'd probably say this is the best one, just by virtue of being able to main deck Shifter is always going to make a deck good. If your deck can main deck Shifter, it's probably going to be one of the best decks of the format, or it's going to be a lot better than the other decks that are similar to it. And so it's the only Go Second deck I would actually play at the moment. I do think it's got a good job. Mystic Mine. So this one is really, really interesting. We thought we were going to see a Mystic Mine. This is relevant to Mystic Mine burn deck. So that's those burn and stall decks. We thought we were going to see a Mystic Mine hit potentially, but it decided just because the OCG did it. But TCG, I mean, we're always late when it comes to that kind of stuff. So Mystic Mines are an interesting one. I'm going to leave them in non-meta. The problem is right now is there's just a lot of back row removal. Everyone and their mum is playing Imperial Orders and stuff. So Mystic Mine, unfortunately, just can't really do an amazing job because everyone's got removal. No one's really going to get caught slipping by a card like that. Adamanticators. So Adamanticators, they've seen a bit of a buff, and I'm definitely going to put them, I'd say, at the top of the non-meta tier, almost rogue. Like I said, they're another ones who've got a bit of a buff. They're going to be seeing a lot of reprints, so we're going to see more people playing them just because they're going to get their reprints in the megatins. I still think they're an inferior combo deck. One of the things about Adamanticate is that it's got a very, very good start to its combo because it's got so many starters, but right at the moment it just doesn't make an amazing board. It makes a good board, but it's not as good as other decks, and it doesn't have recursion, and so that's what makes it weaker than the other combo decks at the moment. It can start the combo, but it can't end the combo well, unfortunately. But definitely still a good deck. Not a meta deck, not even a rogue deck, but worth picking up potentially if you're getting a Megatons anyway. It's not going to be too expensive. Life Twins, I really think they're going to shoot into the meta. This is another one of those new decks that, and I don't know when they get their link 4, but even right now, just the ability to have an amazing resource game with them. Life Twin Eldritch, I've been seeing some variants of that, I've been seeing other variants as well. It's just really, really strong, and especially when Sword Soul and Flannery's come into the meta, we're going to be needing decks like Life Twins that have a lot of generic spot removal, are able to, like, Life Twins can play the Nightmares really effectively and keep on getting the draw effects because of the way their link arrows point. And so I think they're going to do really, really well in the meta. I think we haven't seen a lot of them, partially because they're expensive, but I do think we're definitely going to see more of it. It's a great deck, and yeah, I'm surprised we haven't seen as much of it so far, but it's definitely a good deck. Orcas. So Orcas, I'm going to put another one is at the top of rogue tier. Orcas is in an interesting position now because the thing about Orcas is its biggest weakness really is not having Harp. Obviously, not having Harp is really limiting the amount of resources they can't. So the thing about before is that Harp essentially is giving you a free extender because you're going to summon something from the deck, use it, and then use its graveyard effect. And not having that is really, really painful for Orcas. However, in spite of that, Dingy Send is always going to be one of the most busted pieces of removal in the game. Same as Madolce, where it's like just being able to send something on the field to the graveyard, not targeting, is going to be great. They can also easily go into Zeus as a result of that. Gearsuit becomes pretty much a one card Zeus, which is going to be really good. And the combination of those two factors really does make you think Orcas has potential. I've been testing some Ghost Second Scrap Orcas builds actually, and they've been really, really good. So I do think Orcas potentially could sneak into the meta in the rogue. Might see one or two tops. I don't think it's as good as the other control decks. But I do definitely think it's worth considering. It might be worth doing a bit of theory crafting with Orcas because yeah, I think it definitely does have some potential. Moving on, Prank Kids. Not a lot to say about. I feel like I've said everything about Prank Kids already, but yeah, Prank Kids. Amazing deck at the moment. It's just too good. It wins game 3 for free because it's Prank Kids and burn it. It burns you, and then just a really, really strong resource game. Losing one Meow is a bit frustrating, I guess, because it does kind of limit their turn 3 and beyond. But it doesn't stop the turn 1 and turn 2, and that's the thing. That is the thing about the ban list, I'd say. The ban list hit the grind. I wouldn't even say it really hit consistency. It hit the grind more of Prank Kids, and so that's the real weakness, I would say. But I don't think it matters too much. I mean, yeah, it's going to be a bit frustrating those times where they stop your first summon and now you don't have any meows at all. But beyond that, it's not really going to matter. It's like those very niche situations. You still got most of the advantages of Prank Kids. So as a result, I definitely think it's still going to be a tier 1 deck. When Sword Soul and Flannery's come out, I definitely think this might shake up a bit. But beyond that, yeah, we'll definitely see a lot of that. Eldritch is another one that I'm going to say top of rogue tier, similar to Orcas. Playing a lot of Orcas, playing a lot of Eldritch recently, and I think as a back row deck, it's pretty much the best back row deck just because their cards don't care when they die, which is nice. And this is Eldritch variants, by the way, so this is Eldritch Dogmatic and stuff. Seeing the reprints in the Megatins is also going to be nice because it means a lot of Eldritch players now have access to cards like Nadir Servant, so we are going to see more of it. Deck might get solved a bit better. Yeah, I definitely think it is a good deck at the moment. The biggest weakness for Eldritch is obviously going to be similar to the other back row decks. There's just so much back row removal that while it's nice to have all of those cards set 5 and past. You're going to be getting blown out by lightning storms and stuff so often that it's just going to lose you games for free, which isn't great. Obviously there's counters to that, but you can't always rely on that, which is a bit of a shame. But yeah, Old Lich, definitely I'd say top of rogue tier. Then Zoo, it's so sad, this deck. So there was like a pure Zoo deck going around, and it was pretty good. So they were playing like Dragoons and Zeuses, and it was really just stack Zeuses, stack Dragoons, and use hand traps. And it was just so good. But I mean, Konami just really don't like Zoo. I mean, it's funny how they hit Zoo so hard because of Tri Brigade. But yeah, losing all the 10 keys and then losing the Barrage, which was like their one power play in that pure deck. I don't know. There's going to be some Zoo purists still trying to play this deck, but in general, I'd say stay away from it. It's a shame, but unfortunately, Zodiac is just, it's not the one at the moment, guys. You don't want to be playing that deck. It's not doing the right job. But yeah, it's a shame, Zoo. They've really been wrecked. And then we're going to be looking at Dogmatic Variants. So this is the same thing. I'm putting it the same here. Dogmatic Variants, this is everything I said for Shadow and Invoked variants applies to Dogmatic variants, same thing. And then Dragoon variants, we thought we were going to see these fall out of the meta, but we haven't. But this is another one I'm going to say is going to be in the rogue tier. One of the reasons why we're not seeing a lot of Dragoon variants is because people are just prepared for it. The top decks have easy ways to out those cards, and then even if you're not a top deck, you're going to be siding ways to remove those remove cards like Dragoon as a result. Having said that, just the fact that we didn't see Dragoon leave the meta is interesting. We didn't see him on the ban list, so it's going to be nice. It's not nice. Nice is the wrong word, but it's going to be interesting to see what people do with Dragoon, if they're going to be any more interesting Dragoon decks. We also have Destiny Hero Phoenix Enforcer coming out, so it's going to be interesting to see if people are going to start playing that more and we start seeing that splashed into decks more, or if people are going to still stick with Dragoon just because we've got it. But yeah, this is my tier list so far, and in my opinion, yeah, I'll say this is about accurate. This is how the format feels. It feels like we've got 3 definitively best decks in the format at the moment, and then after that there's just quite a lot of options if you want to play a deck. There's just quite a few decks that you can play and jump on, and that you might not necessarily, you're not going to see it win 15 different regionals, but you're definitely going to see it top here and there, because yeah, these decks all do have their different advantages. But yeah, so guys, thank you all for watching, and I'll talk to you all later. Peace.